In this video, I'm going to show you a couple different things. First, a couple of useful tools. A lot of times we need to get the host name or the current date and time to do certain things. They're just useful things to have. There's a lot of useful little functions that you can use in VB.NET that can typically solve some problem that you have. So I'm going to show you how to use some of these, just to give you a quick overview. The first one is I want to play with getting the host name. Okay, so to get the host name, so let's say we want to get the variable which is the host name from which the script is running. A lot of times when we do logging, we like to log the host name. That way, either A, because we're writing it to a table somewhere, so we know which script did something, or writing out to a log file for some reason. So the way we get the host name, we use a library in VB, which is the system.net.dns library. So, and we could just reference this. I think we can reference it by its full name. But let's give this a try. So first, we're going to declare a variable. So under we don't have to do it inside the function. We can do it here in the class. So we're going to do a public variable. I haven't really talked about this yet. Let's give this a try. So I'm going to use L_hostname, and that's going to be an object because we're going to use a, let's see, we're going to use, so it's going to be system.net.dns. Now, we have system imported already. We have system.io, but we don't have system.net or system.net.dns, so we have to put the full name in here. And the method that I'm going to get or use is getHostName. So that's a method that should return the host name. I want to convert it to a string so that we can use it somewhere, and we're going to make it all uppercase. So I'm just going to convert it all to uppercase with .toUpper. So we're using kind of a couple different methods here. This is the first method is going to get the host name. Then we're going to pass that to a method to turn it into a string, and then we're going to pass that to another method to turn it into uppercase. And then somewhere in here, we're going to go ahead and we are going to write out the host name. So we'll say my host name. And we're going to get that host name. And I'll just put net there for the name of the script, or for the message type. All right, while I'm in here, you recall we wrote this before. I am going to get rid of all this this logging in here. Actually, I'm not going to get rid of it. We're going to do something a little different here. So we are going to declare another public variable. Actually, we'll do a constant, and we'll call it debug. It'll be a Boolean, and it's going to be false. So this way, I can use debug as a check to see if we're going to do extra logging, and then I'm going to go in here and if debug, and you probably don't have to say true. It'll probably work without saying true in here, but there we go. And we'll do it again here. And I think we got one more line down here. And hopefully I have the syntax right, or else we're going to get a whole bunch of compile errors. So now we're not going to see all this output to the log file. We don't really need to see all that stuff. Remember, this is our function we wrote earlier for trimming a patient ID with zeros. So now we should write out the host name for us. While we're in here, let's do one other one. I want to output the see if we can output the current date and time. In fact, we should be able to just do that with a log entry. I'm just going to copy this. A lot of times we need to get the current date and time. So let's see, right now, So we'll do it as a timestamp. And there should be a method we can use in VB.NET to do this as well. So let's take a look. So I'm going to drag over the documentation here. So in the documentation in Microsoft, so I just went into MSDN and I found the datetime class. So in the datetime class, there's some methods. Let's see what methods we have. I just clicked on the side there. So here's a list of methods. And there should be one in here that we can use to get the current date time. So let's look through this list and see if we, and I believe it's just datetime.net. Actually, you know what? It's going to be a property, not a method. So let's take a look at the properties. There we go. So now should be the current date time. There we go. So if we use current date time, we should be able to return. It should return to us the current date time. Let's see if there's any examples in here that help us. No, not really. Not a lot. But I'm pretty sure if we just do datetime.now, there is a way to format the date and time to something that we want. And let's see if we can find something on how to format the date and time. So I'm going to go to .NET Pearls. So date, time, .now, format. Here we go. So there it is right there. So we could just do datetime.now to string and use the format. So we should be able to put this all together. Right, in this example, let me copy this and bring this over to the other screen. So, and I'll separate this for us so we can see all this. So there's our host name on this line. We're going to try to do the date time, but you can see here that first it's creating a variable called time, which is actually just datetime.now. Then it's creating a variable called format, which there's our format string, and then it puts it all together right here. But there's nothing that says that we can't put that all together ourselves, right? So we can just do datetime.now. So that's going to be, so if you substitute datetime.now, that's what this is. Then we're going to do .toString. And then inside there, we're going to put our formatting. Now, I don't like the way they have this formatted. I'm going to use what we commonly use for our timestamps. So we'll do YY, MMDD, HH, MM. I think the month is something else. I'm not sure what month is. Let's look that up. So in the documentation from .NET Pearls, it's not very clear. It does say here that 3Ms is the 3-letter month, and 1 capital M is the 1-digit month. And I think if we do 2 capital M's, it's going to be the 2-digit month. So let's give that a try. So we'll just make this 2 capital M's. All right, so that should give us the current date and time, right? I don't need any of this stuff. We were just using that as a guide. But hopefully you can see how I used .NET Pearls to look up the syntax for that. So let me go ahead and restart. I'm going to stop this. We'll restart this. See if we start getting some logging here. And I'm also going to check this one over here, see if we get any exceptions. Alright, so we're just waiting for one of these to change. Ah, here we go. So this worked. There was no compile error. So I'm just using this to see if any compile errors come up. On the left side, we've got, yep, there we go. So it's showing the new patient ID with our little function. Then we have our host name. And then you can see here the date and timestamp. So 2018-06, 2018, and then 2018 just happens to be the time. That's not the year on the end, although it looks like it. It just happens to be that time in Azure. So that's it. So we did a couple useful things there. So the next thing I want to show you is reading and writing files. And that's why I showed you the timestamp and the host name. I think we're going to try to use these to manipulate the file. Maybe we'll make the file name will be the host name with the date and time or something like that. So let's give this a try. So as far as manipulating files, oh, and by the way, before I forget, one thing in here, up here where we use system.net.dns, I could have avoided using that by importing system.net and system.net.dns up here. So I could have done, let me just do this for you. So I could have imported system.net and then system.net.dns, right? So if I import that stuff, I should be able to get rid of it here. And if we restart Ultra Workflow, let's see if we get any errors. Yeah, it's still running, so that works. Right? Just makes it a little bit easier sometimes to import up here instead of using those full, the full names down here. So the next step, the next thing we want to do is, and by the way, date time I think is part of system. But the next thing I want to do is I want to read and write files. So we're going to use a some .NET class, a .NET class to manipulate the files first, and then we'll use a different class to read the actual contents of the file. If all you want to do is move files around, delete files, things like that, do basic file system management, there's a class for that. That's the file class. So the file class will let you manipulate files and move them around. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. But one thing that we frequently have to do is we have to read in a list of files, right? So we want to maybe take a directory somewhere, read in everything that's in that directory, and then do something with all the files that we find in that directory. So my first step here, if we're going to do this, I am going to create a constant, so another constant. So, and by the way, I'm putting it at the top of my script here as a constant because then it'll be available for any of the functions that are in my script. I just declare it once at the top. It's also easier for users, right? If users have to make changes to some of these variables, it's a lot easier if it's all the way at the top of the script. It just makes it easier for them, and they can find stuff much easier. So let's say I have a path that I'm going to use to monitor for files. And I'm just going to call it monitor path. And I'm going to make it a string. And the path in this case, I kind of already created it before. So this is my path that I'm going to use for input files. And then we're going to manipulate those files. So there's my, my full path to that input. So my next step is we want to see if we can get a list of those files. Now before I do that, we should probably make a couple copies here. Right, so we have more than one file, and I'll just call it file 2, file 3, all right, so now I've got a bunch of files in here. They're just text files. All right, so the next step is, so below these two lines, we're going to leave those in there so we can reference those later. So we want to read all the files in that path. So first, we are going to check to see if the path exists. And I think system.io should have some classes that let us work with directories. And in fact, I'm gonna see if I can drag over. Give me 1 second. So we'll look for system.io. Actually, I think I've already got Microsoft open here. There we go. So system, and let's see if we have a directory. It is in system.io. Here we go. So in system.io rather, we have this directory class, and we've got a whole bunch of methods here. So one of the methods, we should be able to list all of the files in a directory. And I believe that that is going to be, well, first we want to see if we can, if the path exists, right? We don't want to try to read a path for which there's nothing, nothing in there. So let's start with that. So we're going to do, we're going to check to see if a directory exists. So if directory that exists, and we're going to look in our monitor path. And if we can't find anything, we're going to put a log entry in here. So let's do this. We're going to say directory not found if it can't find it. All right, so if it does find it, we are going to try to show the path of, or try to show all the files that exist in that directory. So to do that, we're just going to do directory dot get files, and I think we just put the monitor path, and it should work for us. Now that's going to get, when we do that, it's going to return an object, I think. So what we're going to want to do is make that a string, right? We're going to do a for each loop for each one of these. So we have to declare a variable here. So we'll call it files. Actually, I'll use L underscore. That's our best practice here. So L files as a string. Remember, a string without the parentheses is just one value. When you put the parentheses on it, that means that it's a collection or a list of things. So in this case, it's going to be a list of things, so we're going to have to use the parentheses. And if you recall before, we were able to look through all that list of things with a for loop. So for each file, right? So we're going to do for each L underscore file. Right? We have files, but now this is just a file. That's just going to be a string because it's just one value. And that's for files in L underscore files. Right? So for each file in L underscore files, I'm going to put a next right here so I don't forget to close that, because that would generate a compile error. All right, so for each file, we are going to just output the file name. So let's do it with a log entry. So file found, and we'll put the file name in here. All right, so now we're going to output our files that are in that directory. Hopefully, output those files that are in that directory. Let's just try this for right now and see if this works. So I'm going to restart the service. I come over here and hit Control-C and restart it because I never know if it's running or not. Sometimes when you lose focus from the log file, there we go. There we go. So it returned all of our files, right? So there's all of our files. Now sometimes we're going to want to get just the file name, not the full path to that file, right? So we want to extract just the file name out of that. And I believe there's a method for us to do that. So here's some documentation. It tells me that I can get just the file name, right? So I can read in the file name. So we could do that. So let's switch to that. So we're going to do just get file name. It looks like this is in system.io, so I don't need anything else. It's just get file name and then provide the path. Let's see if this works. So, and actually, we should be able to just do it right here in our log entry. Actually, you know what? We're going to get rid of the old log entry. and we'll just put the new one in. So we'll do get file name from L file. See if it recognizes that method. So back over here, you know, and this log entry is getting, this log file is getting a bit long, so I'm gonna delete the log. That way we start from scratch. Just gotta wait for another one. Make sure we don't have a compile error. Ah, look at this, we have a compile error. Get file name is not declared, right? By the way, notice how much easier this is to look at the file, the errors this way, right? It's a little bit easier because it just, you know, does it in real time. So here I have my compile error. Get file name is not declared. So I'm going to go back to here. So get file name apparently is not. Let's see, get file name. That's it right there, and it says that it's part of system.io. Interesting. So let's see what class this is part of. Oh, it's part of the path class. So I think we're going to have to use a path in front of it. So it's going to be path.getFileName. So let's try that, according to the documentation anyway. So just waiting for the file. There we go. And we just have the file names. Right? Looks pretty good. Okay, so next, let's continue on here. I think what we're going to try to do now is we're going to try to move that file to another path. Right? So we should be able to do file.move, I think. That sounds pretty simple, right? So in system.io, I think there's a file class that you can just call to do a move. I'm going to stop the service while we're doing this so we don't kill our log file. So with file.move, we're just going to pass in the path to the file, the source, and then the destination file name. So in this case, our source is going to be lfile. And our destination, we have to create a destination. So I'm going to create another constant up here at the top for our output. And I already created this folder, but I just called it files out. And I like to put the little reverse solidus in the path, because then we're not going to have to worry about putting it into our into the command here. But we're going to output the file to output path. Now we have two options here. We can concatenate to output path. We can't just put output path because it's a folder, not an actual file, right? We have to put in a file name where we want to move it to, right? We're moving from a file name to a file name, so we have to concatenate to output path the rest of that file name. Now what we could do is concatenate path.getFile, right? Because this is the actual file name, and then we'll just have a duplicate of that file with the exact same name. Okay, so let's give this a try. So I'm going to start up our script again, and assuming I did this right, under files out, I should see some files generated over here. And you can see here it moved the files over here, right? So if I look at files in, there's no more files because they've been moved, right? I didn't copy them, I moved them. So now my script is going to stop logging that we have those files. And if I copy them and put them back in file in, you're going to see them disappear in about 10 seconds as they move to the other folder. Let's see what happens. So I think it might not work because I have to delete these. So let me delete those. There we go. So we have 1, 2, 3. There we go. The move failed because the files already existed, but we fixed that. All right, so now let's make another change here. You know, I made the earlier. We came up with a way to get the timestamp and all that. So a lot of times when we create files with, let me just make sure I deleted these. A lot of times when we create files, we want to have the new files we create have the date timestamp on them, right? So we know when we created them or what they are. You know, we manipulate those file names. So instead of just having the file name, right? So now I'm going to add to this. We're going to do the host name. Right? So we're going to throw the host name in here. And I'm going to put a date timestamp on here. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing. And then the path, right? And if I really want to get fancy, maybe I'll put some underscores in here. Right? That way they're separated. So let's see what happens now. So I'm going to go ahead and start this. Let's go over here and see if we get a see if we get some files. We're going to look for this log file to increment a little bit. There we go. And here we have our host name, and then our timestamp, and then the file name. It's all here. Okay. So another thing we might want to do is we don't want to just move files around. A lot of times we want to read a file in, do something with that file, you know, with a text file, for example, like HL7 messages, and then write them back out somewhere else after we do some manipulation with those files. So let's give that a try. So we're going to try to see if we can manipulate our text files. So let's make some little changes here. We're still going to read all these files, you know, all these file paths. But now we're going to read the contents of those files. And there should be some libraries we can use to read in the contents of a file. And that's going to be the object reader, so the stream reader, which is an object reader is the data type. And I happen to already have it in my notepad here, so I'm going to copy this over. But basically what we're going to do is in here, instead of moving that file, instead I'm going to read the contents of that file. I'm just going to leave it, I'm going to call it HL7. It's a lot of times we're reading in HL7 files, so I'm just going to call it HL7, right? So this is going to basically create a, and actually, you know, that I think about this, let's create a, let's just call it file contents. So dim file content as a string. And we're going to read that file to the end. So basically we're passing in that file name, right? With system.io.streamReader, we're going to read the contents of the file. It's going to write it into file content. And then we close that object, and now we have a variable that has the contents of that file. And I'm going to output it to the log file so we can see it. So our file content, there we go. Now what we can do, we already know how we can manipulate strings. So I'm going to take the file content and I'm going to concatenate to it, or I'm going to add to it some stuff. Let's add the host name. And we're going to add our little timestamp on there too while we're at it. Actually, we don't need to add the timestamp. We'll just put the host name inside that file. So we're going to add the host name. I don't want to just add the host name though. I also want to add a carriage return, and we do that by putting the ASCII for a carriage return in that file. So there's two ways that we can add that carriage return. The first one is we can use the CHR character and we can add a 10, and then we can add character 13. One of these is a carriage return, and the other one is a line feed. So that's one way to do it. So CHR 10 and then CHR 13, and that should add character, ASCII code 10 and 13 to our text file, which again should be a carriage return and a line feed, which is essentially like hitting the enter key on your keyboard when you're in a text file. So we'll give that a try and see if that works, and then we're going to write out that file. So writing out a file is going to be a little bit different. We are going to we're going to have to use a goodness, what do they call that? We're going to have to use another method to do that. So the method we are going to use, let's see if I can look it up here. Okay, so we're going to use the same library. We're going to use StreamWriter instead of StreamReader to write out that file. So it's going to be let's see, we have to declare it first, right? So it's going to be dim object reader as StreamWriter. And we have to pass into this method the path that we want to write out that file. And if you recall, we sort of did that before, right? So our output path is going to be output path. And in this case, I'm going to concatenate the date and time to it. And then I'm going to concatenate to that .txt. So it's a text file. All right, so that's where it's going to create our new file, right? So that should try to create the new file. And since now I have this object reader object that we created, right, that's using StreamWriter, it's a new instance of StreamWriter, I can do things with it. The first thing I'm going to do is write to that the contents of that file, right? So I'm going to write the file contents. And then I have to close it, right? So we write it. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. So we write, then we close the file, and that should be it. So we create this file, we write some contents to it, and then we're going to close that file. And that's it. So it should create a file with a timestamp. The contents of the file is going to have the it's going to be the file contents plus the and actually we're going to have to copy these, right? Because we have to start with these. So I'm going to copy these back to file in. I'm going to show you what the contents of the files are. Oh, my script must still be running. Let's stop workflow so we're not fighting with these files. Okay. So, oh, well, they're awful long file names now, but the contents of the files are, there we go, it's just this is a test, right? That's it. That's all I've got in these files. So, coming back here, it should write out the content of that file. It's going to concatenate a carriage return, line feed, and then the host name. So it'll just be a new line with the host name, and then it's going to write out the file, and it's only going to be basic. It's just going to be called the current date timestamp with .txt, and that's it. So let's save this, and we'll give it a shot here. So first, I'm going to go over here and open up Files Out. We're going to start Ultra Workflow. See if we get some log entries. Just waiting on workflow to start. There we go, it started. Let's check and make sure we don't have a compile error. Looks like we have a compile error. So local variable object reader is already declared in the current block. Oh, yeah, I already used that. I used it twice because I used the same we can't use the same thing twice. So we're going to do, I'm going to call it object writer, since we're actually writing with this, right? So we'll call it object writer. And everywhere I reference it, I have to update that. So we'll stop Ultra Workflow, save it, come back over here, start it. And we'll keep an eye on this and see if anything happens, and we'll keep an eye on this file output and see if anything happens over there. Oh, there we go. So there's the contents of the file, right? It finds the file, it reads out the contents. Looking over here, we've got one file now, right? Now the reason there's only one file, we lost all of our test files, is because the date timestamp is the same probably, right? So now it's going to start writing these out. Let's see if our file, yeah, well, we already have all these file ins. But what's happening is it's creating that file, but it's not granular enough, right? We're only going to the nearest minute. We have to go all the way down to the millisecond to get those files. So I think we can probably extend this to the millisecond. Let's see if we can find the documentation on doing that. So I think I'm on the right track here. This is in the date time format. So SS is going to be seconds in 2-letter. So we can add the seconds to it first. So let's go back in here and add our seconds to this. And then I'm going to put a dot, and I'll put the maybe the millionths of a second if they have it. Let's see what they've got here. Yeah, millionths of a second. Well, millions might be a little too much. I think we're going to do 3. Yeah, 3 should do it. So milliseconds. We'll do 3 capital Fs. So that, actually, there we go. So let's give this a try. There we go. So it's a little more granular. It's probably still a little too close in time. Oh, there we go. So we got some more stuff showing up in there. So okay, so we were able to read and write our files. So now you know how to monitor a directory, read some files. Of course, we have to remember to delete files when we're done, or else it's going to keep reading them over and over again. So we could, when we're done, each run through a script, for example, we could go in here and do a file.delete. So now that I'm done, I do file.delete, and I pass in the name of the file that I want to delete, which in this case is just lfile, right? Because that's our file name. And if I restart this, now when it's done reading these files, it should delete them. Let's see what it does. There we go. They're all deleted. So it ran pretty quick. And again, I still have all my files here. Now, once again, one of the things that we probably, oh, you know, we forgot to look in the file. Let's see if the file, well, it didn't put our carriage return in. A little odd, but let's open it up in Notepad++. Yeah, so if we look, I probably put them in backwards, but if we view all the symbols in Notepad++, there's the line feed, there's the carriage return. It probably should be CRLF, not LFCR. I think it's backwards, so Notepad doesn't show it. But in any event, let's go ahead and close this. So, oh, and let me turn off all this formatting. That'll drive us nuts. So I should probably just reverse these, right? So this would be 13, and this one would be char 10. But for right now, one thing I want to do is, you know, again, this script is starting to get a little bit crowded. So I'm going to create a function out of these, right? So we're going to create a function for reading the contents of a file, and then we'll create a function for writing the contents of a file. So I'm going to call the first one. So let's go down here and create a new function. And we'll call it save text to file. And we're going to pass two things into this argument. So we'll pass in the contents. So we'll call it file content as a string. Then we're also going to pass in the file name. Right, because you have to know where to write it. And that should be the full path, right? I should probably put that here. I'll put file name file path and name. There we go. Just so it's obvious if somebody needs to read this documentation later. And the last thing I'm going to do is pass in vlog, right? We did this before. Oh wait, as Boolean, sorry. So we're going to return true or false, basically. True if it worked and false if it doesn't. All right, now I need to get the code to do this. So this is our code. Oh, wait, we're doing file writer right now. So this is the code to write out the file. Okay, so that's going to read in the contents of the file. Now, one thing I want to show you here, we haven't really done this yet, but every once in a while we need to, we're going to need to put some error checks in here. So first thing I want to do is when we first run this function that's going to write out a text file, we want to start with, let's see, we're going to, I'll call it did it work, right? You can call this something else if you want, but did it work as a Boolean. And we'll start with saying false. In other words, it didn't work, right? So we're going to assume that this is not going to work. Okay? Then we're going to try. So we're going to try to run this code, right? Now remember, this right here, we have to replace this. This is going to be the file name. And the file content will be right here. All right, so if that works, then our L did it work. So once that's finished, we'll set L did it work equals true, right? Because it worked. And then if it didn't work, we're going to catch that error. So that's the exception. Oops, I have to spell it right. And we're going to well, actually, we'll just catch that. So, and really what this is doing, the try catch, is if this fails, it will crash the whole script and everything will stop running. If that happens, try catch is going to prevent that from happening, and instead we can return the it'll return false, right? So now we're going to return did it work. So if this works, then it'll get to this line and set it to true. But if this fails, it'll already be set to false, and we're going to return false. And we have to return that value, so we're going to put a return there. There we go. And that's it. We could add some logging in here, right? It would probably make sense to add some logging since we passed in vlog. But for right now, I'll let you guys add that later on if you want to add that. But this is going to save our text file. Then we also want to have a function that's going to read our text file. So, oops, read file content. So we're going to pass in the path to the file. We'll also pass in the vlog again, right? That way we have access to logging. And we're going to return the string, which is the actual file. All right, and once again, we're going to copy and paste our code from before. So there's our read file stuff. And this time we just need the file path. Here's our file content. And we are going to return that file content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another try on here. And I'm just going to make it blank, right? So it's going to start out as blank. Then we're going to try this. And if it doesn't work, at least we'll just return a blank string. All right, that should work. So now we can read our file content and save our content. So let's come back up here, and instead of all this mess right here, instead we are going to read our file content. Pass the file name. We're going to read it into a variable. We'll call it dim_l_content as a string equals read file content. Oops, I called it file content, so I might as well, so I don't have to change everything. Alright, so it's going to read in our file content, and it's going to write it out for us. We're going to concatenate some stuff here. Now I no longer need any of this stuff, right? Because now we're going to write out our file. So let's do this real quick. So we're going to save text to file. And to do that, we have to pass in our file content. All right, so we start with our file content, then we have to pass in the file path and name, which is right here. I'm just going to copy it. And finally, v_log. That way we have access to logging, even though we're not using it right now. So now what I can do here, because this is going to return true or false, I can check to see if it worked. So first I declare a variable. So dim did this work as Boolean, right? Because it's going to return true or false. And if it worked, then we're going to delete the file, the original file, right? We don't want to delete if it didn't work, right? Otherwise it'll be gone. And if it didn't work, I want to output something ominous so everyone knows it didn't work. And I'll say failed to write the file. Now, it probably would be better practice for me to create a variable for this file name instead of passing it like this every time, because what's going to happen is that date timestamp is going to keep changing on us, right? So we're going to add that here. And it'll make our code a little bit cleaner too. There we go. So we'll have our file name. Okay. So this code does the same thing, but now we're calling functions instead of that are down here, rather than calling all that code from here. Right? So it's a little bit cleaner. We're concentrating, you can see it's a lot easier to read when we use these functions. So it's good practice. Instead of writing everything all in one giant function, it's good practice to have all these different functions. That way you're concentrating just on the business logic up here. It'll also be a lot easier for troubleshooting. All right, let's give this a whirl. So I'm going to stop the service. I've got a bunch of files here. Our input files are gone, so I got to move these, right? So I'm going to cut these, copy them over here. Since I'm in here, I'm going to delete the log file. All right, now assuming I didn't mess up that code, which I think maybe I did. I think I didn't use the, I think I may have not used the right syntax for the try catch. Let's find out. Yeah, it looks like I didn't use the right format for catch, but it looks like I got a bunch of other compile errors here too. So let's take a look at these. So these compile errors are starting right here, right? So is at 2105, right? 9:05, that's the current system time. So the first one was line 33, argument not specified for parameter vlog. So let's go to line 33 and see what it's complaining about. Oh, we forgot to call this with vlog, right? We have to pass vlog. So that's the first one. What else did we mess up? So on line 73, catch must end with a matching end try. So I forgot the end try. So we really don't need a catch, I think. I think I can just do an end try. So I'll try that. And it looks like on line 81, there's also a something about hiding a variable. Let's see what that's all about. So line 81. Oh, you can't redeclare, right? So I declared file content here. I can't declare it a second time. So I have to take out that syntax for declaring. And we're just going to do an end try because I'm not really catching anything here. Usually you could catch the file, the exception, so you can log it, but which would be best practice, but we can always do that later. So let's save this. All right, so let's see if we still have a compile error. Looks like we do. Oh, we have to have a catch. So let me put the catch in there. So I was trying to use shorthand here, but we do have to have a catch. So we're just gonna, instead of returning an error here, I'm just gonna return did it work, which is Boolean, right? And same for this, we're gonna do a catch. There we go. All right, now I'm just waiting for there we go. Okay, so it ran, right? Let's take a look at the, yep, there it created some files for us. Here's our input files. We didn't really end up with that many output files, but they're here. And you can see it's actually, because I fixed it, right? So now it's putting that carriage return in because I reversed the 10 and the 13. But it worked, so we're good. So in this lesson, you learned a little bit about file I/O, how to read files and write files. So we learned how to read a list of files. One thing I didn't tell you how to do, which might be useful, is how to only read files with a certain pattern, right? So what you can do in the directory.get files, so I'll go back up here. So directory.get files, you can overload this function. Overload means adding additional arguments that are optional. I could say I only want to look for files that have a pattern of .txt, right? And if we're working with HL7, we would probably do .hl7. So if I do this, let me stop the script. So let's copy these back into file in. Let me get rid of them over here, otherwise. And I'm just going to make a couple copies here so that we've got a bunch of files to work with. But then I'm also going to create a file. And we'll make it a rich text document. Should not be read. All right, so it should see all these files, but it should skip over this one because it's not .txt, it's .rtf. You can see over here, I'm not showing the file extensions, but it's over here. So let's go ahead and start this up again. And I should see some files disappearing over here. There we go. And you can see that it did not read, should not be read, because it's an RTF. So with this basic, some of the basic skills you have now, you should now be able to write any script that's going to read files and write out files. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to read in HL7 files and manipulate HL7 files. So we're going to use our HL7 library, which is just really, we're just going to put some functions in the bottom. We're going to add some functions down here, and I'm going to show you how to create HL7 messages and read HL7 messages. So we'll do that next.